Hello, and welcome to Galen Data's Medical Device Connectivity Innovation Webinar Series. My name is Keith Drake. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Galen Data. Our topic today, and I'm really looking forward to this, is 100+ medical device success stories. We'll be hearing lessons learned from all stages of medical device company evolution, from initial concept through development and growth, and then to commercial launch, and finally to acquisition. So we think we have topics of interest for everybody today. These success stories and cautionary tales will be shared by successful medtech businessman and entrepreneur, Rene. Rene founded the Emergo Group in 1997, which became the largest leading global medtech regulatory affairs firm in the world. As Emergo's president and CEO, he grew the business to offices in over 25 countries until it was acquired by Underwriters Laboratory in 2017. Rene has extensive experience guiding companies engaged in international trade, particularly in the medical device industry. He currently leads Medenvoy Global, which supports manufacturers of medical devices and IVDs as stipulated by EU regulation, which we'll hear more about later. Rene, welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
Go over our logistics today. At any time to our audience, you can submit your Q&A questions in the questions window in your GoToWebinar console. We have informational handouts available for download also in the console. We'll be taking a poll here in a couple minutes during the webinar to learn more about you, our audience, to better serve you now and in the future. And a recording of this webinar will be provided in a follow-up email. Very quickly, to remind everybody about the Galen Cloud, Galen Data's primary product. The Galen Cloud is a secure, compliant, and turnkey cloud connectivity platform. It is purpose-built for medical devices. It's compatible with all cloud infrastructures, AWS, on down the list. We're very proud of the fact that we are officially ISO 13485 certified. We are compliant with a wide range of regulatory requirements, and it's a highly configurable platform that we feel meets a vast majority, if not all, of your medical device connectivity needs. So our discussion today, we're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to talk about, first, Rene's going to share with us the Emergo journey, from beginning to end, the 20 years, and some lessons learned there. And then he's going to share some additional success stories, companies that he helped succeed along the way, share some learnings from those experiences. And then some more broad guidance and mentoring, some other lessons learned that Rene feels would be of value to our audience today. We're going to shift gears a little bit to Galen Data and focus on cloud connectivity and what Rene sees as the current and future trajectory of cloud connectivity and the important role it plays in medical devices. And then finally, we're going to keep our eye on the prize and talk about exit strategies, things to be aware of at every step of a company's evolution. So before we get into our discussion, we'll take a poll, and that is, what type of organization do you represent? In your console right now, you should see the poll opening, and please select one of the following. Do you represent a medical device manufacturer, or maybe a company that provides software as a medical device? Perhaps you represent a device design and/or development company, including contract manufacturers. And then finally, a quality or regulatory organization or other. So medical device manufacturer, software as a medical device, device design development company, quality or regulatory organization, or other. Give everybody just a few more seconds. I see a lot of answers coming in, pretty much what we expect. A broad spectrum. We've got a broad audience today, Rene. All right, we will go ahead and close the poll. Thank you for participating. And we'll shift into our discussion. Rene, let's first talk about the 20 years of your life, of your heart and soul, the Emergo journey. Let's begin with that, and maybe start at the beginning of that journey. What was the genesis of Emergo, and from that genesis, how did you grow the business?
Yeah, so it started all on Hampton Lane in Bethesda, Maryland in 1999, and it was at a mailbox, etc. So not that I was in the business of a franchise like that, but I definitely had a mailbox, which is really where Emergo started. So before I continue on that, obviously there were some reasons why I started in Bethesda, Maryland, and that kind of originated from my grad school at the Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies in Bologna, Italy. And we were a student body of 136 students, and we had a representation of over 35 countries. And then living in a campus on a beautiful island, right, in the center of a beautiful Italian city. So that whole ambiance and that experience really led me to believe that, okay, I don't want to give up on this. It was a one-year study, and the experience was such profound on me that I said, I want to prolong this. And where can I find it? And of course, you could say, okay, I need to obviously start to make a living, and but where can I find a similar international environment? And you can go to a city like Paris or London, where you find obviously many representations from countries and cultures, but those are also very large cities. So I ended up in Brussels, Belgium, which is known as the capital of Europe from a European Union perspective, and that is a small town. At the time when I arrived there in 1990. It was a city well under 1 million citizens, but the whole world is represented. Not only the member states, right, of the European Union, other countries as well that do business in Europe. So I found my first job in a lobby group associated with the American Chamber of Commerce. And then 3 years into that, I found a job working for the US government at the Foreign Commercial Service at the US mission to the EU. And that is how I got introduced to obviously a variety of topics related to internal market, the harmonization of product legislation. And one of the harmonization of product legislation was medical devices. So that was the first time that I got in touch with medical devices. I do not come out of the industry, never worked in a medical device company, never worked in a regulatory affairs firm. So it was purely a coincidence that I rolled into this. And after 7.5 years in Brussels, my first wife and we had our first child in Brussels as well. And I was a Dutchman hired by the US government. Doesn't give a lot of opportunities. You hit the ceiling fairly well. You're not a career diplomat, obviously, and you're a foreigner, as we would like to say in Texas. And so I reached that ceiling. But so it's one of those crossroads in your young, I think, professional life. What is next? So we decided, based on the knowledge that I had gained, learning about these product requirements for medical devices in Europe, part of the CE marking, what we call the new approach directives at the time. I said I can use this and sell that knowledge to US manufacturers who have an interest in exporting to the European Union. And so that's what it started. So we packed our bags. And of course, I had my green card through my first wife, who was American. But I still felt I was one of those pioneers that the United States is well known about. The only difference is I'm a 20th century pioneer, and I had an American credit card in my pocket when I arrived. So, and then we moved to Bethesda, Maryland, close to FDA, even though that was not the initial reasons, very well. So that's where it started. And we started to compile, initially some services around exporting to Europe. Beginning.
Rene, I think either you are dropping out a little bit, but you're back now. Well, that's an interesting genesis. Took you around the globe, it sounds like, to land in Bethesda, Maryland. At that point, what was your focus to grow the business? You had a great business idea. You felt in your heart it was going to work, but tell us about the other 98%, the sweat equity. How did you grow the business?
Well, yeah, emphasize sweat, the other 98%. So you can hear me well now, right? I just want to make sure that I'm not dropping out. But yeah, no, it was a big deep dive into an unknown world, right? Obviously living in another country, and then obviously being in a new area, the world of consulting, and then in the world of medical devices, where I only knew enough to be dangerous when it comes to what the requirements are, but absolutely had no clue what truly the practical implications are for medical device manufacturers and manufacturers. So yeah, it was a scary period, but I did it with a lot of optimism and excitement. And so I think part of the success and the way we grew our business is that, yeah, I was therefore a newcomer, kind of a young guy at the time. The industry, the regulatory affairs industry, was mainly driven by individuals or maybe 2-3 person shows, often old hands in the industry. And I say that with a lot of respect. I'm not referring to age. It's just that people have been around for a while. And so a lot of word of mouth kind of marketing. And so obviously being the new guy in town, younger, and even though I started my career pre-internet, I obviously more in tune with all the new opportunities from a marketing perspective, how you can sell these type of services. So I really tapped into that. So I think part of the success of Emergo is that particular fact that we in the early stage used the marketing tools available to us, having a website, starting with the SEO, all those type of things. And so that's one reason. I think Emergo knew very well how to tap into those new opportunities to get the message out to a broad range. The second reason, I think, our overall service offering. We always like about one-stop shop, not that we were, but we did develop services that to it. And then particularly cater to small and medium-sized companies, which, as we know, is 75% tech industry is small and medium-sized. We offered regulatory affairs services, so helping companies with initially getting into Europe, regulatory affairs, so submissions, device submissions, files, both for Europe. We also helped with quality management system development and implementations, which is another regulatory requirement. There was a requirement that if you do not have a place of business in the European Union, you need to have a European authorized representative, the point of contact for non-EU based medtech companies who represents them in case there's a problem. So it's very important in the, what I would say, surveillance, post-market surveillance aspect once a product is placed in the market. So it helps with coordination with adverse event requirements, etc. So those 3 main service areas, and within them, of course, we have individuals, service offerings like risk management. We can help with later the clinical evaluation reporting. So there are a lot of elements within those 3 categories, but these 3 were, I think, also part of the success. Once you have a good grip on these 3 areas, it also then allowed me, what are the requirements of other markets in the world? So that our third, I think, competitive advantage. I saw in this back to my time in Bologna and living in Brussels. I always looked for a business that would allow me to travel, to be meeting other folks from other countries, and being more culturally engaged in that way. Well, I found that obviously with Emergo, and so we started to build a global infrastructure that would allow us to help medical device companies export in other markets. So that became a credo a little bit. Emergo helps you to get device approvals in other markets than your domestic market. So that's why you saw all the different offices starting popping up in markets that our clients told us to be of their interest. And the service offering that I mentioned earlier had a component of typical consulting from A to Z, right? You do the job and end it, go to the next project. But authorized representation that I talked about, where companies need to have that local representative, that became a recurring revenue stream. But I think that was another part of our success, being able to work like consultants do in general with a project and the recurring revenue that we built up over the years to become a large revenue source and a very stable revenue source, because it's a type of service that connects you with your customer for a long period of time, and therefore allows you also to cross-sell obviously your other services that you have and they may not have tapped into. So that combined with a very strong project management component. Again, we grew fairly very steadily. And being obviously becoming a larger player, we tried to deviate how normal consulting firms in our space were operating. The consultant was also the project manager. that was kind of the person of all things, and we separated that. So we built in a strong project management component with Emergo that would help our consultants to focus on the job that needs to be done. When they travel, they're not being burdened with all types of other activities. They work on multiple projects at any given time. So that project management was nice for the consultants, as well as from a business perspective, would that help us better to support the quality? Yeah.
Rene, before we shift gears into some insight into some of the medical device companies that you directly help succeed, what you've told me so far begs the question. You had 20 years from initial concept to acquisition by UL, Underwriters Laboratory. During those 20 years of growth, can you name one stumbling block or one surprise, something that just kind of caught you flat-footed, maybe provided some opportunity, but just something you did not foresee until it happened?
Yeah, I'm not trying to be this amazing visionary, but I have to be honest. Nothing major has come along my journey that would either shift me to go left or right. I think maybe we're lucky, but I think we picked the right services, maybe the right industry. I think the right approach. Our marketing was successful. Our operational part was successful. The service offering was on par. So nothing special. I think a few things that came to mind. One, maybe going into a market, see the opportunity, and then how to set ourselves up. Emergo has grown mainly organically, but we did some acquisitions throughout the years. And I had a partnership with a fairly large consulting firm run by a great entrepreneur in China. And I never regret that I built that relationship with that company. But I think in hindsight, it would have been better that we would have taken more control over our destiny in China, which is not easy to do because often at those times you had to partner locally. But we didn't have always that control. China's culture is amazing, beautiful. You need to understand it very well from a business perspective. You can really make big mistakes, and I've done that, right? I've done it along the way. But so that's what I think. The other thing I think maybe I was in the way sometimes of our growth, and that has to do with just the way how I run Emergo, enjoying life outside Emergo as well. So maybe I didn't always. Maybe I should have left a little bit more money in the business as we grew and saw other opportunities. So it took always a little bit longer for us to get to certain things that maybe would be good for the business, may grow it faster. But it was more my personal greed that sometimes stood in the way. Never taking, always making sure that we're operational for a longer period of time. But I think you get the gist of it.
And I imagine your success, and specifically no major stumbling blocks or surprises along your 20-year journey, was, I imagine you balanced the near term, the tactical, the practical with the long-term strategic and objective-oriented view. And it's a tough balance, especially for our audience. A lot of the folks in our audience are early to mid-stage medical device companies. They're focusing on preparing their device for clinical trial, in some cases getting the engineering working, but it's always important to keep your eye on the long view as well. Clinical trials, contract manufacturing, cloud connectivity to plug Galen data. So let's shift gears, and with the recognition that our audience is primarily those early to mid-stage medical device companies. Let's talk about some of the companies that you help succeed. Could you share a couple examples, maybe give some lessons learned that would resonate with our audiences, specifically what you did for them, how you helped them succeed?
Yeah, so obviously our service offering, I just ran through it very quickly, but obviously those were the areas that we help companies with. But the regulatory part of a medical device company is very important, and depending who you are, right? Whether you are a startup or you could be new to the medical device industry, and that can be an unpleasant surprise, right? Are the regulatory requirements that can really be in the way if you do not understand them in advance. So I think that's something. So I think we help companies. If we got engaged with a startup company, I always found it extremely rewarding particularly you have to have proper funding, of course, but it's very rewarding, because there you can in an early stage, you can, obviously talk a little bit about the pitfalls and the challenges along the way, and also help them to identify what the regulatory roadmap is going to be, the cost associated with it, the timelines, which helps, particularly if they even are still in the funding stage, right? Because they can definitely picture a much more accurate picture of their journey and the funding needed to get to that point. So I think that was always very rewarding, and at the same time, it was also often a point that I realized that a lot of companies, right, that we ran into didn't spend enough time and effort to understand that point. So, but I always love that companies that we got in an early stage help them initially with the quality, with the regulatory strategy, outlining those aspects, and then roll up our sleeves and help to develop and implement a partial quality system while they're designing their device, and then eventually then help with the approval process, putting the technical documentation together, get for 510K clearance or for a CE marking, and then finish the complete quality management system, and then off they go. They're getting into the market, and whether that would be domestic or Europe, then acting as an in-country representative, the recurring revenue part of it, and then ongoing support as these companies grow. And sometimes that leads to an exit, right, an acquisition. Other times it leads to an ongoing, just simple growth. And then us taking them globally. So not just going to Europe, now we're going to maybe to parts of Asia. We're going to Latin America, where we had offices. Another thing that we often noticed is, and we could be extremely helpful at the time, but they're not always there's never a plan B someplace for these companies in the stage. So they think they have the device, they have the golden egg, right? This is going to be it. The process, okay, the regulatory process may have some hurdles, but they'll get over those. But then also on the commercial side. So the regulatory and the commercial strategy sometimes is not always aligned, because they may never get to commercialization, because their strategy is that once we get approval, now the potential buyer will be knocking on their door and take their product and their business. And we have often seen that that's not the case, even though they may have the golden egg. Larger companies, when they look for potential acquisitions, they just don't want to see that you obtain approvals for your device, but they also like to see some type of commercial activity, that there is a demand in the market. And so that suddenly, that plan B now requires manufacturing. Now you need to set up maybe a distribution network, right? So the whole commercialization is part of it. So that was a surprise. So again, if we could give them heads up early and help them with that plan B in advance, that is, those are all good. From a certain, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned plan B, and that's an intriguing concept, and it gets us into our next segment, more specific guidance and mentoring. Should a company you should always have a plan B. Should they have multiple plan Bs? A plan B if the engineering is just more of a challenge than they originally anticipated. Maybe the engineering was easy and there was a regulatory challenge, or maybe reimbursement models change, or maybe just a competitor comes on the marketplace. Should a company have multiple plan Bs for all the success channels?
They do, but they do, and they need to have it in advance, right? So they need to think about all the ifs. So, and it all comes to doing homework properly in the very beginning. And we all know, being a startup, the limitations sometimes of your funding, you have to make your choices. And I'm sometimes subjective in what I think is important. Obviously, I come from the regulatory side, but we've seen too many times that regulatory does have a profound impact on the success of a medical device company. So I do think I can speak with reason why it is so important. But yeah, I think there are a lot of elements sometimes that are overseen. The whole discussion about outsourcing versus doing it in-house and spending your money on bringing in human resources to cover that. And I think sometimes the choices are not always logical, and I think not even cost effective. Particularly if you link it to time to market, which we all know time is money when it comes to these things. And their choices in outsourcing, again, subjectively, I think from a regulatory perspective, there is obviously a lot you can outsource. There are a lot of providers out there who can support you in that area. They've done it, they've been there, so they can prevent any delays. On the manufacturing, if you don't have really manufacturing or let's say design and manufacturing experience, there are outfits out there that you can outsource. When it comes to factor engineering, right? It's we all, when we were acquired by UL, we had a human factor engineering department, a group there, run by Michael Wicknoon, which is a true expert in the field. And there are costs associated to it, but it all made sense to me, not just from a regulatory perspective, since we all know that there are regulatory requirements associated with human factor engineering, but it also makes total commercial sense, total design sense. And again, it's an area that I think companies should allocate funding to, because it prevents a lot of challenges in the market. It helps with clients. You save, you can have a better quality product from a user perspective. So it's those things are often good. I think companies should focus on what they do well and what they don't do well, or they can be outsourced because there's a lot of opportunity. Then you should outsource.
You touch on a lot of good points. Typically we think of the regulatory pathway as being the long pole in the tent, and the putting together the documentation, submitting, maybe multiple iterations. But there are a myriad of issues that could be other long poles in the tent. The earlier we think about them, the greater we reduce the time to market. As we're talking about things that we need to know, but we just won't read in books or in blogs. Let me ask you this, Rene. During your 20 years at Emergo and beyond, what question did medical device companies not ask you often enough?
I think I touched upon it. I think the understanding of the regulatory roadmap and requirements, and then linking that to market access. Again, companies do not even ask the question if there truly is a market. Particularly when we talk about device, I guess it also has to do with the business culture here. Very optimistic, which is why I love. And I am so happy that I came here and started the business, because I have a very similar attitude. But it does come with some challenges. We've seen it on trade shows. A company meets the first distributor that walks into the booth, from a particular country, and says, "Hey, I can take your product. I can help you process, and it's going to be all wonderful and great." And then if that is not immediately part of your regulatory or commercial strategy to go into that market, right, then say, why not? Let's do it. Now they set up all types of agreements between the distributor that is going to come and hunt them later down the road when that market may be of interest. So,
right.
So again, the market research is critical. Don't jump too quickly into a market when you find the first distributor that that shows an interest in you. Just be patient. Focus on what is strategically important to you from a market perspective. The other thing is, in the same line, some of these companies came to us and then they say, where is the low-hanging fruit? Okay, so in the beginning, I was always taken aback by that, because what do you mean? So you just go to a market where it's easy from a regulatory access perspective to sell your product. So I said, okay, I can mention a lot of countries in Africa. And then they're taken aback, right? They say, well, Africa is not in. So I said, so then after the discussion started again, why would you go to low-hanging fruit? The commercialization still is a challenge in some of these markets. You may have less of a regulatory hurdle, but to commercialize the product. And what is the true gain that you get here strategically to go to these markets? But you will be surprised how often we receive that question and got that question. So.
Rene, you used a word a few minutes ago, patience. Often it's difficult. We're so eager to succeed, we jump at that first distributor. So let me segue that into time management and kind of ask you a two-part question. In your experience, where do you feel medical device companies should spend more time, and what are some time wasters that should be ignored?
Yeah, so well, again, I'm repeating myself, I guess, to some extent, but we talked about it earlier. So make sure that I think you need to have a good regulatory commercial strategy, and that may include market research. Obviously, what is the regulatory roadmap? So again, so that's a bit of a repetition, but I do think companies should spend enough time. I think I would say in the first 15 years of Emergo, these questions should come up all the time. I ran into them all the time. I have to say that the last 5 years, and now after Emergo, and I'm more involved with investments and funding, I do see that the VCs also becoming way more smarter about looking at these companies, at these products, and what it's going to take. They know what to ask for, because even VCs didn't always know the regulatory part of it, and we're just sold and blinded by the opportunity of the device. And so I think that it has become less of an issue. So I do think that is more prevalent than it was before. Reimbursement, right, is another issue, right? Who is going to pay for your product, right? And how is it going to be paid, depending where you go in the world? Is reimbursement critical to the survival of your product? Is it reimbursement, but maybe there are other avenues where you could sell your product? So again, do proper homework in that perspective. They need to do proper homework of what happens once they are in the market, right? So from a post-market surveillance, it's a big area from a regulatory compliance point of view that regulators are looking at and are regulating. In the US, particularly in Europe, there's a strong emphasis on post-market. So again, that's where a lot of the homework needs to be spent. And you don't do that by the time when you have your device. You need to do that all in advance. Then you are aware of it, you can leave it, but then you pick up once you're ready to commercialize it with a lot of knowledge and preparedness.
It can be overwhelming, but if done right, it can be very successful. Okay, that's good. Good advice. Let's shift gears again and talk about cloud connectivity, device connectivity specifically in the cloud. What do you see as the current and the future trajectory of medical device as it relates to cloud connectivity, and also in association with that, what should be the focus now, today, of medical device companies to best take advantage of the cloud and its connectivity?
Well, I think the first point is that it's a very bright future for Galen data. Since I see it behind you, Keith, so it reminded me, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a reason why Galen data exists and came about. So obviously there's a lot of buzz about connectivity, medical device connectivity. We're all involved as we speak. If I turn to my left, I see my iPhone, and I have AFib thanks to being an entrepreneur and all the stress that I had, even though it has not been formally diagnosed, right? But there are all these. Anybody in this webinar is associated with some form of cloud connectivity from a device perspective, right? So there's a lot of buzz around it. When you look at the trends, are all obviously supporting the need for cloud connectivity, right? Devices to have some type of form of cloud connectivity. We're all getting older. You can see it from my photo that went around when you were announcing the webinar, and the photo that you just showed. I definitely did age. It's not my younger son, that was me, but I was in the mid 2000s, I think. So there is tremendous aging going on, aging population, not only in the US, it's in Europe, it's in China, it's in Japan. So it's all over in all the large device markets, and that's a fact. So we see an increase in chronic diseases. There's going to be, obviously with COVID, happens to be this year, we see the challenges for the healthcare system to manage an epidemic like this and the consequences of it. Well, obviously these trends of getting older, obviously it will be slower, but it will be there, right? So the healthcare system will not be able to have enough hospital beds for an aging population with all the challenges that comes along. So I think obviously cloud connectivity is going to play an extremely important part, right? And we see that a lot of devices, wearables that I talked about earlier, are already coming to market. The whole industry, there are not many devices that do not have an opportunity potentially, or are thinking about an opportunity that they need to be connected to the cloud. So that's one thing. There's going to be a lot of cost savings opportunities associated with it, right? The remote monitoring, patient monitoring is going to play a very important factor because of all of this. From a regulatory perspective, the post-market surveillance part of it, there's a lot of opportunities here as well, because the industry is being challenged, right? How to overall traceability of your devices, the need for collecting of ongoing clinical data about your device, which are all regulatory requirements. How are you going to do that? Well, with the technology and cloud connectivity, there are quite a lot of opportunities. there. So then there are the hurdles as well, right? There's still some skepticism. Are regulations in tune with the speed of the technology and innovation as this come about? But I think this will all be overcome, and I truly believe that COVID may have something, may help to expedite this understanding. And within COVID, we've seen, some expedited way of getting products, obviously vaccines approved, and so does this mean that in the future we'll have faster mechanisms, regulatory mechanisms to get products approved? We know that there is definitely a movement towards it. COVID will have this discussion. There's always caution. I know I wear my regulatory hat again, that it can also lead to obviously a lot of challenges when we expedite certain products to market.
And Rene, before we move on to our last segment, I'll comment that the opportunity that we are seeing here at Galen Data from our medical device company clients is not just in connectivity for the patient data, but connectivity of the device data itself. I forget who it was, but somebody made an observation that there is no check engine light for a medical device. Cloud connectivity gives the medical device manufacturer the opportunity to create that check engine light, to monitor each individual device, battery level, health of the device, outside of the patient data. So yes, agreed, a lot of opportunity, and we're very excited here at Galen Data about our growth path. Let's talk about everybody's growth path and exit strategy. We only have a couple more minutes for this segment. We're going to roll soon into our Q&A and give our audience an opportunity to ask their questions. But nearly everyone has an exit strategy. What is your advice to keep an eye on the exit strategy at every stage of development, early, mid, and then mature stage companies?
Sure, yeah, and I think that also applies to a company like Emergo, as it started in the basement, right, with the mailbox, etc. So I never thought that I would exit. So I just looked for an opportunity and built a business and have a lot of fun with it. And then, as with hard work, and I didn't mention that earlier as part of the success. I think one of the things is to build a very strong team around your device, or in the case of Emergo, around its services. And if I take credit for something, I've been extremely good at picking the right people that became the key figures in the company over time and during the exit, which was Emergo would have never been what it was at the time of its sale with the key people, and it would have not been what it is today with those same people, because they're still all there after the exit. I'm the only one that moved on, but everybody else stayed. So Michael Vanderwood, I mentioned his name because he was kind of my right hand at the time, and he's now running Emergo by UL. And again, so I give a lot of credit to him and my other colleagues who've been there, including one of the first employees that I hired, which was Julie Powell, who just recently retired, but was with us for 16 years, 16, 17. Yeah. So that's one thing. So my advice is obviously, even though you may not know the exit, right, or you do have an exit, keep good practices in the company from an accounting perspective, from a regulatory perspective. Keep good housekeeping. It sounds simple. It's easy to say we'll get to that, and we use the napkin, right? And we'll do some backdating and whatever it is. But so it's very important to do that. I think it pays off in the end, and it's also overall a good business practice, even though I know there are some costs associated to it. So I would say run your business, as if you would exit today. From that perspective, it also make sure that you have good partnerships, right? So if you have vendors, make sure the contracts between these vendors are all up to par. Have good. I mentioned the regulatory documentation already earlier. Make sure you have good insurances. These are all simple things. And you often don't think about. That's another thing that I was always surprised, particularly in our role as in-country representative in these different markets, where we run high risk because we are associated with the device, or if something happens. So we always demanded our clients to have insurances. I'm amazed how many medical device companies, and not just low risk, from mid to high risk, do not have proper insurances, sometimes no insurances at all, or it only covers the United States. And I can tell you from my perspective, sometimes good insurance, in this case, I won't make promotion for CHOP insurance, but that's the one that Emergo had, and it really helped Emergo and me personally during the exit, because challenges always come along. And we had one where we had one of our consultants went rogue. You know, a great consultant, but he started making very wrong decisions in support of one client. And even though our quality management system has the checks and balances, we weren't able to catch it, and that was a big problem. Now, luckily, the buyer, in this case, transparency, right? That's another recommendation. Always be transparent. Don't leave any skeletons in the closet when you prepare for it. So it ended up all to be fine. Also partially because we had a great legal counsel in house, but it does come back to that good housekeeping. Make sure that you have your ducks in a row. Keep it clean, because that delays any due diligence process if you don't do that up front. And just make that an automatic practice within the business.
Very good. Let me ask you, before we get to our Q&A session, tell us about Medenvoy. What are you up to now? Just in a minute or so. What do we need to know about your current venture?
Yeah, so when I left UL, which was actually in late December 2019, I stayed on with another 3 years. And people know UL very well. I have used their services. For me, it was a very good strategic reason to pick UL. We did not shop, even though we had a lot of interest in Emergo at the time to be acquired, from strategic partners to private equity firms, etc. I am still stand by the decision that I went with UL, did not go to market and work with them. And so that's one point. So I left. I do have a non-compete, which is normal. And when I left UL, I said, I'm going to do a lot of other things. And I have. I've been investing in a lot of different industries I absolutely have no understanding of, which makes it more fun and it keeps my brain going. But you cannot leave an industry where you've been so active in over the last 25 years. And I did not realize that how much I'm still attached to it. And so I had a partner, Edgar Castile, who run one of the spin-offs of a division of Emergo called now Lactor Medical, which UL didn't want, so we spun it off just before the acquisition. And with the new medical device regulations in Europe, there is a particular requirement for non-EU based manufacturers to have an importer that helps with, I would say, ensuring that the devices placed in the European market are compliant. So there are some checks and everything else. What I love about the service, because it's similar to how Emergo started, which was with that recurring revenue part of it, the authorized representative. And this is a similar type of requirement or an entity where companies may be better off to select an independent importer. They only need one that's going to obviously help these companies to ensure that they are compliant to the MDR. So it smelled so familiar to me, and so I'm back into it. So that is Medenvoy, provides that specific service, and I will take a deep dive into it again only with this particular service, and we'll see what happens and have a lot of fun with it. But I do think it will be a good service and pretty new. There are not many competitors yet. After this webinar, I think I'm going to be in deep trouble.
All right. Well, that's exciting, and we'll certainly keep in touch as you proceed down your current pathway to success. We will now transition to our Q&A period. Before we do, I want to suggest to our audience what your next steps are. If you found value in today's webinar, let me give you 3 things to think about. The first is think about where you spend your time. Rene talked about prioritization of time, what to focus on. Where could you refocus? Given where you are right now, where could you refocus your time to add value down the road? Number 2, Rene has covered a lot of ground today. Regulatory, engineering, organizational, business management, A to Z certainly. Think about one thing that Rene covered today that can begin benefiting you tomorrow. There may be more than one thing, but focus on one thing, write it down, and share it with your team tomorrow. And then number 3, let us know if Galen data can help you now with your cloud connectivity strategy. You may not be ready for a couple years. Now is the time to have that conversation. Maybe we can shift your focus a little bit to facilitate when you are ready for cloud connectivity. I'd like to announce next month's webinar. It'll be Tuesday, February 16th. The title is How to Maximize Business Value Through Protection and Enhancement of Your Intellectual Property. Our guest presenter will be Timothy Scott. He is a renowned medical device patent attorney. Our producer is posting the registration link in the chat window now. So when you go to Webinar Console, you can simply go to the chat window, click the link, and register for that webinar. Tim is going to cover a lot of ground. It's not just how to file for a patent, but how to do your engineering and design to maximize your IP for things like reimbursement. It is really a complex web that Timothy will help us unwind during that webinar. So I will now shift to our Q&A session. You can submit your questions in the questions window in the console. A recording, I'll also mention that a recording of this webinar will be provided via email. And with that, let's dive right in. First question, Rene, they are coming in fast and furious. So first question, what are your thoughts on the integration of wearable medical devices into electronic health record systems like Epic, Cerner, etc.?
All for it.
Why?
Again, being an older guy, starting to have older people's issues. I mean, I visit the doctor. Not only now, I'm pretty healthy. Don't get me wrong, but we all visit doctors, and the healthcare or health institution records, the repetitiveness of it drives you crazy, right? So we've seen there's a mandate, obviously, for healthcare institutions to have more electronic records. So if that can go hand in hand with also the use of medical devices, wearables, etc., I guess we got a winning team going. So, and I can't wait to see that, because I'll be honest, I thought that it would have been already much further than it is. And just see practical experience going to some of these institutions and the paperwork associated with it, the inefficiency, the opportunity for mistakes. It's just so yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it is happening, and I can't wait when it becomes, it's second nature. We do not know better.
Rene, in a prior life before Galen, company I worked for, we were involved in hospital interoperability of systems. And we ran across a lot of companies to potentially partner with. And what we learned is if those systems didn't integrate, they may be wonderful as far as their features and functionality, but if they didn't integrate, the clinicians didn't want them. The clinicians did not want to log into 20 different systems. They wanted to log into one system. Yeah. I will also, and that's what EHR connectivity through something like the Galen Cloud would certainly provide. I'll note to our audience that you can watch our May 2020 webinar, which is entitled The Next Generation of EHR Medical Device Interoperability. And I'll ask our producer, if it's handy, I'll ask him to post the link to that webinar in the chat area of this GoToWebinar right now. So you can just click that link. It'll take you to our webinar page, and you can watch that May 2020 webinar. Next question. We've been challenged with FDA 510K, with the FDA 510K clearance process. And as we build out our team, we debate whether we hire regulatory expertise or outsource with a consulting firm, or maybe a hybrid, a blend. What's the best answer? Or more broadly, what are the decision factors to base the decision on?
Well, yeah, if I tie that back into what I discussed earlier, obviously the question indicates that there are some challenges with the 510K. So I'm not sure if it was done in-house, whether this has to do with the expertise maybe with in-house available. But my general answer is that there are a lot of or sources out there outside the company that can help you, right? So Emergo is one of those companies, but there are a lot of regulatory affairs specialists out there that provide their services, their expertise to prevent some of these challenges. So why not hire people who have a lot of knowledge and know where the holes are in a potential 510K submission or not? So And you could do a hybrid as well, right? Ongoing basis. Again, if you don't have to hire people, you don't want to increase your overhead. Again, sometimes you pay a little bit more money on an hourly rate with the consultant, but it also prevents that your overhead, creeps in. So, and again, time to market may be really helped when you bring in the expertise from outside if you don't have it in-house. So you can do all three. But I think overall, my general answer is this is one of those areas where you really need to think hard. Are you trying to bring it in-house, or can this just be outsourced and leave it outsourced?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Next question. How evolved a regulatory strategy should a seed stage startup with a combination product be expected to have from a VC or investor perspective?
I mean, how elaborated? What was the question?
How evolved a regulatory strategy? How mature should a company's regulatory strategy be for a seed stage startup very early on with a combination product? Not sure what the combination is, but from a VC or investor perspective. So I'm assuming this company is early stage. They're going after maybe bridge funding or even Series A. How important is that regulatory strategy to that potential investor?
Critical. Again, it links back to my earlier discussion. And it's not just for a combination device, but the combination of the device, you have the drug part of it and you have the device part of it. So there are a lot of potential pitfalls, right, and challenges that may come along with that. So, I think VCs, they both have the responsibility, right? A VC or somebody who's going to bring in the funding, they need to know what they're getting into, but that's not always the case. So I think as a company, you have the responsibility to be as elaborate and as clear from a regulatory perspective what the trajectory is going to be. And we all know we need to sell the product. We know we need to sometimes also sell an optimistic regulatory roadmap, right? But I always say it's better to be upfront and honest and take it all very conservative when it comes, because the funding will dry up if you make mistakes along the way, and you're going to be in deep cahoots. And it's better to inform an investor from the get-go what they're getting into. They become bigger allies when you need more money down the road, and when the story is still the same. So yeah, definitely do a lot of homework and present a very clear regulatory strategy.
Rene, next question. Early on in our conversation, you talked about some of the marketing you did, that it was primarily organic, word of mouth. But more broadly, and from a medical device company's perspective, how did you scale Emergo's visibility? What do you believe was the key to your marketing success?
Yeah, so it was not so much word of mouth. Hopefully that became later definitely a factor, right? When we earned our our credibility and quality of the work and the service that we deliver. It was really that marketing aspect. Simple terms. And when you think about the 90s, we had a fancy website. We had Chris Shore, who was the first employee actually I hired in Austin. Was not the first within Emergo, but when we moved our headquarters in 2004 to Austin, we hired him. Again, take credit of me hiring him, because it was a game changer in our industry to have somebody like him really taking up the website, SEO, social media as it went. So that has really been the success of Emergo. We were very good. We were a marketing house, even though I know that my regulatory affairs colleagues within Emergo cringe. They hate me when I say that we were a good marketing house that led to the success of Emergo. Of course, you have to also deliver in what you market, right? So we do have the quality and the knowledge in-house or through contractors. But truly the success was just hardcore marketing, make sure it's top of the line, spend enough dollars on it as well, right? You really see it as a strategic tool to grow your business. And I think that's what we did. We did it very early, and we did it up until today, and we did it very well. And ask our competition at the time. They will all confirm that was the case.
I've got a war story that we do not have enough time to tell, but I learned the hard way early in my career. It's the 80-20 rule. Often 20% your product or service, 80% the positioning, the marketing, the promotion, how your client audience perceives you. that's 80% of your success. Doesn't matter what you want to sell, it depends on what they want to buy, and are you presenting that in a way that's appealing to them to meet their needs? Absolutely, and it's never too early to think about that. Here's a good question. How does the 21st Century Cures Act, how will that impact / promote application development in the medical device space?
I hope positively. Of course, that is the intent of the Cure Act. What I like, whether this is all going to unfold the way it's going to unfold, we have to see, particularly now after COVID and how FDA has been in the limelight, I guess, the whole discussion about delaying products to market as if it's always FDA's fault, which is not. But I do think an act like this is a good illustration that the intent is there, that regulations and laws and acts, they all need to support the speed of technical innovation, right? Because we are, and I'm not thinking that it's going to be, that regulatory agencies are going to be hurdles, because I think we see, particularly today, how important it is to make sure that the technology that is available and the innovations that are around the corner have an opportunity to get to market and benefit us as patients, future patients. So I do think the act is a positive contributor to this, and I hope that companies will benefit from it.
You know, an interesting regulatory wrinkle that just has occurred in the last week is the FDA publishing its action plan for self-learning AI and machine learning. If you go to Galen Data's LinkedIn page, you'll see our take on that, how we may participate, and a link to the FDA's action plan. Highly recommend anybody who is taking advantage of that advanced technology or considering to read that action plan. And also, I think it's our July webinar with Mercury Data Science. We talked a lot about the application of advanced technologies, data science to medical devices. Let's see, a couple more questions in the couple minutes that we have left. So you mentioned earlier that every company should have a plan B. For Emergo, did the early vision, your plan A, the early vision you had for Emergo, how did it pivot, and how, if so, how did it pivot as you grew? Did you have to go into plan A.2 or plan B?
No, not really. There was no plan B. Obviously there was a plan A, which was what I explained in the early part of this webinar, and there was not a lot of adjustment at all. The requirements, I guess that's sometimes the benefit of being in the regulatory affairs world. It does change. By the time somebody understands the law, it changes again, right? Which is all great for consulting firms like Emergo. But there's also, obviously, certain regulations do not change a long time. If you look at the Medical Devices Directive in Europe, it's been there around for a long time. It functions overall well. And then at some point, obviously, the major change happened. The overall happened with the medical device regulations. So no, that plan A was solid. And of course, we added to plan A, but it was still part of the strategy and alignment of that strategy as we go. But there was nothing there that required a plan B. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I totally screwed up being an owner of a soccer team, a professional soccer team in Austin, Texas, because when we became professional with the Austin Aztecs in Austin, we had a major storm in Game 6 in Austin, Texas. Texas had a drought for a long time. Then the rain came in on a May day and flooded downtown Austin, including our stadium. And I remember when I was standing on our field, which was a turf, and it was all warped, right, because of the water and everything else, because there was like, I think 5 or almost 9 feet of water in the stadium at the time. And the field was totally ruined. But I remember that I was asked about what are you going to do now? What is your plan B? And my answer was, I don't have one. So I think it may always been originating from Emergo that I thought you don't need to have one. That's why I've been so strong in this webinar to say that you do need to have a plan B.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're nearly out of time, so I want to wrap things here. Thanks to you, Rene, for a very engaging discussion. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm hopeful that our audience did as well. Thanks to our audience for attending our webinar today and for just a great set of very insightful questions from the audience. I'll remind everybody about the Galen Cloud, its features and benefits. We stand ready to help you with your connectivity needs. Our Galen Cloud platform provides turnkey connectivity to a wide range of medical devices, both physical and software as a medical device. It includes access control, onboard analytics, industry-leading security, and it is regulatory compliant. Rene, I've really enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much for your insight, your wisdom, and your dedication to the medical device industry. So thanks again, and goodbye, everyone.